Well, hi everyone. It is so good to be together with you on this evening. My name is Uciel Hernandez Martinez. I'm the pastor here at Centennial Multicultural United Methodist Church in Rockford, and it is a blessing to be together with you as we begin our Lent sessions with Rockford Urban Ministries. And so, with that in mind, I want to invite you to join me as we come together in prayer and as we call upon God and to be with us during this moment that we're going to have together. So let us go before God in prayer. Oh God, of all nations and peoples, our scriptures tells us of God's special concern for the foreigner, for the stranger, and the immigrant. We remember our religious heritage in responding to your call to serve the poor, oppressed, and marginalized of our society. We live in a nation of immigrants, and one in which the diverse gifts of many peoples have contributed to our energy and strength. Yet it is one in which we have shown the words in human nature to immigrants who have been discriminated against because of the color of their skin, because of their language, or the country of their origin. Oh God, help us by your grace to offer radical hospitality to all who are different than us. We come together as a community this night to listen, to learn, and perhaps to deconstruct prejudices and biases, and hopefully to build on the knowledge and experiences of those who will be presenting today. Oh God, use them with your Holy Spirit to call us to be a community that gives warm welcomes to others and to immigrants. May we experience your transforming power touching our hearts in a special way today. Oh God, help us always to recognize that our blessings come from you and remind us to share them with others, especially those who come to us today from other lands. Help us to be generous, just, and welcoming, as you have been and are generous to us. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Reverend. We really appreciate the prayer. This is David Black again, and I'd like to thank all of you for your interest and support, and to thank Rockford Urban Ministries for setting up this timely program and for an invitation to speak. I traveled twice to Tijuana, Mexico as a volunteer with the organization All Ultra Lado, which translates to the other side. The first trip was in May of 2019, and the second was in November of 2019, both of which were pre-COVID. It's possible you've heard about the deplorable conditions in immigrant detention centers in the United States, including the most recent shocking revelations of women forced to have unnecessary surgery. You may hear more about this later, but I will instead be providing some background on how difficult it is for asylum seekers to even get to the border to have their claims begun to be processed. In the interest of time, I'll spare you an extended discussion of my family's own immigration story, but it was part of the reason I felt called to do this work. My mother's mother, aunts, and uncles attempted to immigrate from Hungary. Given the quota systems in place, my grandmother and others were forced to commit immigration fraud to immigrate to the United States. Hers was a classic case of entering into a sham marriage with a US citizen. Some of her siblings were less fortunate. One of my great uncles was a concentration camp survivor who later married another survivor. My great uncle David, whose name that I bear, died in the Holocaust. In other words, someone being called an illegal alien is very personal to me and my family. In a different way, my father's immigration story is also relevant today. As a very young child, he left war-torn Poland with his parents. Again, quotas kept his family from the United States till they settled in Mexico. A second child was born there. Eventually, the family was able to enter the United States, but not all at once. At age 10, my father was the last to go north. He was separated from his family for a matter of weeks and was in the care of a Jewish welfare agency in Mexico and not in the detention center. Yet to his grave, he insisted that the separation was a matter of months, not weeks. I can only imagine the trauma we have caused immigrant children by our family separation policies. I was also called to the border by the sum total of the policies of the Trump administration. With every mean-spirited policy of this administration, I, among others, knew that we had no choice but to do something constructive. It is these policies which I hope we can unravel in the months to come, and that I would like to share with you. You can't understand the crisis in the Mexico-US border without understanding something called the list. Imagine each morning asylum seekers from all over the world lining up just south of the border to be assigned a number and have their names placed on a waiting list for the chance to present themselves for an initial processing as asylum seekers. It is important to realize that this list has no basis in law, as legally asylum seekers should be able to be immediately have their claims at least initially processed. Bill, can you make me a host so I can share a picture? Okay. So, picture I'd like to share is the chart in the office of El Ultralado on May 5th and 6th, the first days that I was there. Note there are three important numbers. The first number represents the last number that was called for processing that day. So that's the last number called. The second number represents the last number that was given out that day. Note that each number represents 10 people. Every morning, the U.S. Border Patrol calls over and states what their capacity is for that day, meaning how many people on the list will be allowed to cross the border for processing. Capacity has ranged from 0 to as many as 40, very rarely 50 as it was on May 5th. Note that the number waiting is growing. At that rate, the wait in Tijuana, again, just to start the asylum process, can run several months. Even longer now, as the Trump administration has virtually closed the border on the pretext of COVID. Simple math tells us that in May of 2019, approximately 10,000 people were in Tijuana, only one of several border crossings, waiting for their term to exercise their right to have their asylum claim just begun. As you may be aware, Central Americans were subject to a wait in Mexico policy, which in true Orwellian fashion was called by the Trump administration the Migrant Protection Protocol. This means that after the initial wait on the list, the months that they waited to have their initial claim made of record, asylum seekers may be returned to Tijuana, one of the most dangerous cities on the planet, to await their court date or dates, which are, again, months away. We know of cases where there have been robberies, beatings, rapes, even murders during the wait in Tijuana. An even more recent policy seeks to require that asylum seekers apply in the first country they enter, as the US has designated several unsafe Central American countries as, quote, safe third countries. There are a few other Trump policies that deserve mention, both so we can understand our past policies and so we can understand what now needs to be done. The definition of what can qualify for asylum was narrowed to eliminate fleeing from domestic violence as a grounds for a successful case. Severe limits were placed on immigration judges in granting parole, which is a kind of a bail for those detained who have made it to the United States to be detained. Let me share one other picture here. Whoops. All right, well, let's skip that picture. So let me briefly recap the process. Someone arrives in Tijuana, which likely involved a long journey that may have started in Africa or in Guatemala or Honduras or in Haiti. They sign the list that which is a relatively easy process, although we have experienced irregularities such as a lack of ID or racial discrimination being used. Sign the list.
You want somebody's attention?
Can we get everyone to mute? Then someone has to wait once they've signed this off for many before being initial process.
Smash Smith is tired
It appears that there's a member of the audience who is.
Bill, are you able to mute?
I actually do not have the ability to mute anyone. I'm sorry.
I would ask that everybody mute themselves unless they're the speaker. So being initially processed means delays in an ice box, which is an unreasonably cold space that is directly below the border crossing, which is, of course, another story altogether, why we would do that for someone when they're awaiting their initial processing after their number's been called. And while awaiting a court date, one of three things can be happening. Someone could be forced to wait in Mexico with all the dangers. They could be put in detention, which again, you likely have read or heard about with its horrors. Or they could, in rare cases, be paroled, which is a kind of a release on bail. And this was curtailed by the Trump administration. Ultimately, an immigration judge, who is a government employee, will decide if asylum is approved. As mentioned, the Trump administration has tried to narrow the grounds for asylum. There's a final obstacle. In response to COVID, the border was closed and has only recently been had a limited reopening with no one being processed. Let me, So the second time I was in Tijuana, my stay coincided with that of Linda Zuba, who's in the middle and is going to be speaking to you in a minute. And I was able to accompany her to shelters to deliver much needed supplies, as you see on the right-hand side of that picture. And they were purchased with funds that were donated by folks like you, folks in Rockford. And here we are with the nun who runs the shelter. Also, the Sunday we were in Tijuana, there was, and every Sunday, there's an ecumenical church service. And the church service is very unique because it takes place simultaneously on both sides of the on both sides of the wall. And I'm not finding the picture. I have a very nice picture, which I'm going to try and find, of Linda giving communion at that church service. But that's technically not going to happen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Linda Zuba, and she will share some of her experiences. Linda?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
And David, if you could just make Linda the featured speaker for everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I think I've met many of you, and this is a very as a subject I'm very passionate about. And I was fortunate enough to be in Tijuana with David one of the times I was there. And it's amazing how much we fuel one another. Seeing people's compassion and kindness towards these asylum seekers really helps. Oh, something happened.
Yeah, can you restart your video? Somehow got stopped.
Unable to start video.
I'm
Something.
gonna make you the host.
Okay.
I can. Okay, I'm gonna ask you to start the video. Can you do it now? Yeah, very good.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. And you are now the host if you want to share pictures.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I actually do. I have been to Dilley, Texas, where there's an immigrant detention center for mothers and children. And my journey really started when they were separating children. It's just, I think we were all so appalled at the fact that the US government could be involved in this inhumane and cruel type of policy. And they were looking for volunteers, Spanish-speaking volunteers in Dilley, and I headed there. And that really is what started my journey. And then I ended up in Tijuana, Mexico on 4 separate occasions, working with asylum seekers. And after the pandemic, my last trip was canceled because of the pandemic, but I was able to work with a couple of organizations remotely, both in Tijuana and Matamoros. And so I'm just, I'm so grateful that I'm able to offer some kind of assistance. And the Rockford community has just been unbelievable in what they've given to help these individuals. And they continue to do so to this day. And I'll share some of that with you in a few minutes. I have to tell you, and I'm sure most of you know how hopeless things felt for quite a while. As far as the Trump administration, every single time I was back at the border, things were worse. And I would say to myself, there's no way things can get worse. But every time I go back, they were worse. It was extremely depressing to see what was happening. The level of cruelty towards asylum seekers was something I never imagined would happen. And now, that's in the past. Now we are feeling hopeful. There's also a lot of frustration. Things aren't moving fast enough. There's still deportations. There's still detention. Things are there. A lot of the advocates and attorneys are frustrated. I'm no longer there, but they share their frustration with how slow things are moving. But at least we have hope, and we are taking steps in the right direction. And I'm going to see if I can share. Am I going to be able to share my screen now, David? I don't know. Host disabled attendee screen. David, can you hear me?
We can't hear David.
You're on mute, David.
Yeah, I can hear you, and you should be good to share.
Okay. Hopefully I can get in here.
There you go.
Oh, that's not my, those aren't my slides. Here we are.
There you go.
Well, for starters, and I think everyone here probably knows that seeking asylum is legal. They may not all qualify, but they have a legal right. Something happened here.
It was on your end.
Oh, I didn't touch anything. Sorry, this is just.
David, I would ask you if you would please make Linda the featured presenter.
I'm not able to. So.
Oh, that's right, because Linda is now the host.
Okay, but she's got her slides back up.
Okay. All right. So, one of the things I've been seeing, and maybe you have too, is there's more talk about immigration and some of the asylum seekers being processed. There's more commentary about how they're referring to them as illegals. and seeking asylum is not illegal. They may not qualify, but they have a legal right to request it. It's very frustrating because the dehumanization of these individuals is picking up again because certain, right-wing groups, not all right-wing groups, but certain groups are definitely demonizing these individuals and causing, you see the hatred as we had in the last few years, and it's quite painful. Today, this was my Facebook memory that popped up today. I posted this a year ago, and this really reminded me, I could still see the horror in the mother's eyes, her fear that this child, 6-month-old, was going to be taken from her by US agents because she was trying to seek asylum. And the choices that they have to make because of the cruelty under the Trump administration is something that no one should have to endure. Her entire family had been killed. She found them in a bag, trash bags, and now she's fleeing for her life. But she knew that they were taking children, and she was so terrified. And along with this is something that really hit people's nerves and pulled at heartstrings, unlike much I've seen. And the good news is I saw this on an Instagram by the Young Center. The proposed U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, the portion of the bill would prohibit officials from separating children from their parents for the purpose of deterring immigration. And it tasks the Department of Homeland Security with using the best interests of the child as its guiding principle in decisions about immigrant children. I mean, this wording and what it stands for is so different from what we've seen under the previous administration. So here, we've got some hope that, and hopefully this proposed bill passes. So this was a priority. I do want to mention along with this, and there's so much we could talk about, but we have limited amount of time. Biden did sign an executive order in which he put together a reunification task force. I've heard, and I don't know if she was actually chosen, but the person who they're talking about being the executive director of this task force is someone that's very highly respected and admired and has worked with refugees. And so, again, these are steps in the right direction. Along with this issue of child reunification, the other area that the Biden administration is really focused on is the Migrant Protection Protocol. It's a priority to, they suspended it right away. No one else is being enrolled in it. And as David said, it's the Migrant Protection Protocol. People want to refer to it as the Migrant Persecution Protocol because it just harmed individuals. You may also have heard of it as referred to as Remain in Mexico. And so they're, instead of being allowed into the US with their family or their sponsors, they're having to wait along the US-Mexico border in some of the most dangerous areas. Now, last week was a big week. You won't be able to see this, but this is something that was handed out to asylum seekers and people who wanted to know more. They have gone all out on social media, giving information out to asylum seekers. As of February 19th, they could register for an appointment. And this is only for those who are part of the Migrant Protection Protocol. Only those, not on the waiting list or no one else, just those who have been part of this MPP. They could register starting February 19th, get an appointment to then cross over. Before they're going to be allowed into the US, though, they are going to go through COVID testing, and only those who are positive can go forward and go to their family or whoever is going to be helping them along. And this is it's a really big deal. Now, I don't know how many more have crossed, but as of the 19th, it was, breaking news, 25 asylum seekers have been allowed in. And, There is frustration right now, though. I know that there were a lot of glitches in the Matamoros area. It seemed to go a little smoother in Tijuana. Not all ports are going to be open. As far as I know right now, Tijuana and Matamoros across from Brownsville, Texas, are the ones that are open. Now, this handout basically explains how everyone else who's trying to get in or ask for asylum, there's no news at this point. They're going to have to wait to get more information as to when it can be processed. I'm having a hard time getting my slides. I think I'm going to just go this way. So anyway, it was really pretty orderly. They had a site for computers to go in and register and set an appointment to go across. Starting yesterday, they could actually use their phone or WhatsApp to get information. And it's really quite the collaboration, which United Nations organization, UNICEF, several organizations are helping collaborate and work together to process and get asylum seekers across. So it is quite the undertaking. And it's exciting. Unfortunately, for those who are not part of the MPP, but have been on the waiting list, as David mentioned, and I'm in touch with some who've been on a waiting list for 19 months or more, and they're not even mentioned as far as, when are they going to be allowed to go through. So a lot of things need to be worked out. David talked about having to get in a line to get your number. And this is actually the line in Tijuana at El Chaparral. And this is the book that their names, this is La Lista. This is where their names would be. And this is how crazy and arbitrary it would be. This book was on its last page. So on this particular day, they ran out of room, and everyone who had been waiting in line from 5:30 in the morning was asked to leave because they didn't have any more room in this notebook. It's so devastating. It doesn't sound serious, but if you've traveled thousands of miles and you're exhausted and scared, and your children might be sick, and then this type of thing happens, these little pieces of paper about the size of a quarter is where they would write your number. It could be 2,000 something, and then you're told, well, it could be 4 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 9 months. It's really just, that's how they start. They've suffered through this journey, and then they get here and they're told they're going to have to wait. And this process is called metering. It didn't start under Trump, but it definitely got worse under Trump as far as how many people were allowed to go through, if they're lucky. So they get their number. Now they got to figure out where to go. If they're lucky, they could end up in one of these shelters. And I'm sharing these shelters with you because the Rockford community has really donated a lot of money to get essential items. This is Casa Migrante, and I love it on the outside. I actually took David there last time we were there together. And it says, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And right next to it is a women's shelter it's run by a Catholic church. And both of these, they fill up easily. And this is basically kind of what they state. This is, one of the nicer type of situations. A lot of people staying in a room. Things really changed because of COVID, of course. If they don't find a place, they would often end up along the river or in tents. This is a tent encampment in Matamoros, Mexico. And it is one of the most dangerous areas in the world. Matamoros is. It's considered level 4 for travel because of the high number of the level of crime. So those who are on the waiting list, who never even started with this migrant protection protocol because they never even got to ask for asylum yet, both those on the waiting list and those on migrant protection protocol are stranded in one of these areas. Some of the shelters were extremely dangerous. They were run by gangs. and horrible things happened in some of them. So we only had a certain list of shelters that we would give people information to. As David said, what happens to these people as they're waiting? Instead of being allowed to wait with family or sponsors on the US side, this is how they were living for 2 years. Some of them, it's been 2 years. I've met people who were kidnapped more than once, raped more than once, tortured, extorted, and of course, some have been murdered. And when we talk about rape, it wasn't just women being raped, it was children being raped and men being raped. The stories are just absolutely appalling, and this could have all been avoided. But this is what part of the Trump policy was, to force them to stay here, regardless of the danger that they were in. I want to share something about a family, because the Rockford community is supporting this family. This is the hand of a woman who came to Al Otro Lado. We couldn't take pictures of them at Al Otro Lado, but she is just something out of some horror movie. It involved whistleblowing and gangs and extortion and embezzlement in Central America. And then the mother was taken and tortured, left for dead. And then they went after the daughter. This is Miss C, and the husband. This young woman was just, by the time when I saw her, she was just falling apart. She had been gang raped, just got out of the hospital, had such severe injuries that she was hospitalized, and she's still not okay. She still has some internal damage from what they did to her. And this green Afghan was sewn by a beautiful woman friend here in Rockford, who gave me a whole bunch of Afghans and asked me to give them to people who needed them. And I couldn't spend too much time with her because I was seeing other clients, but I did wrap her around. I wrapped that Afghan around her, and I told her, every time she needed to feel a hug or needed a hug, to wrap that around her. And she cried at just the thought that people cared, that people in Rockford cared about her. And this is her now. They're staying in a small room that is being paid for by a group of Rockford women. And every month we send the money through Western Union. And every month she sends a picture with thank you, with all my love. This is her mother and father. The mother had suffered horrible torture. She still has wounds on her legs, and her husband he has epilepsy. And the last time they were kidnapped, the reason that they got away was because he had a grand mal seizure, and it freaked out the criminals who had kidnapped them. The mother is suffering from depression. The father continues to have seizures, and Miss C, the young woman, can barely walk because of her internal injuries. So it's, and they're on a waiting list, and they have no idea when they're going to be able to ask for asylum. Now, the kind of proof that they have of what happened to them, it's really a very strong case. One thing I forgot to mention, the day that I met them at Al Otro Lado, they had literally run there because 6 men with rifles had shown up at the shelter, one of the safest shelters that I showed you, looking for them because this gang in Central America hired hitmen to go after them. And so they were running, even while in Tijuana, from these hitmen. It's really a terrifying situation, and I could go on all the horrible things that happened to them. I just wanted to show you, this is the little room. There's 3 mats here on the floor, and their blankets. We bought them a little portable stove, and they have dishes, and this is a little refrigerator. And you would think they live in a palace. They are so happy and so grateful for the people of Rockford. And we've been supporting them for about a year now. And I can't tell you how grateful they are, and as well as so many others who the Rockford community have helped, because it's often the last bit of hope just to know that someone out there cares about them. We don't know them, but it's our shared humanity that really connects us. There was a woman in Matamoros who she was part of a sex trafficking ring in Central America. She had a 2-year-old. She got pregnant, during the sex trafficking ring, and then she was pregnant again, and she couldn't take it any longer. She's 21 years old, and she decided she was going to do everything she could to flee. So she gets away. She goes to the police station, and they end up telling the gang, guess who's been here? Because oftentimes there are police who are working with the gang. So, most of these people don't feel safe going to the police because they know that it's not safe. And so now the gang is after her. She ends up making her way from, I don't want to get specific about this, the country, but it's a very long journey, unbelievable, pregnant and with a 2-year-old. She does make it to Matamoros. And is, pleading for help, asking for asylum, and the gang hires hitmen, and now they're after her in Matamoros. This is just this past fall, but because of the danger to herself and the danger to even other asylum seekers, she was allowed to cross the border. She made it as far as Chicago, and a lawyer I know from Matamoros connected me with this family. And once again, the Rockford community came forward, put together a crib and everything that a young mother, a toddler, and an infant would need, and some money to get them started. It's just been amazing the impact it had on this woman, that complete strangers lifted them out of such despair and fear. So just 2 weeks ago, I was sent this little picture of little JC. He's doing fine. He wasn't doing fine when he was born. He had to stay in the hospital for a while, but he's thriving now. And a lot of it has to do with kindness of so many people that are that we have in our community and in other communities. So I'll end it with, and we could take questions later, but I truly believe that compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. And there are times we're not going to be able to help them, but they should never be harmed ever. Like we have tortured them over the last 4 years in particular. So thank you for listening. And I have to introduce our next speaker, and it's Dr. Paul Klazura. And I have just been so grateful to him. He is a Rockford physician, a kind and compassionate human being who truly cared for these asylum seekers. And he is a perfect example of how every single life matters, and what he did to save the life of a young boy is something I will never forget. And I'm just so grateful to know him. And Dr. Paul, you're next.
Linda, your words are too kind. That said, just a little background on myself. I've been in Rockford for almost 30 years now, and I was a retired vascular surgeon who retired in 2016. I listened to everything that you all saw on TV and was horrified. And truthfully, my trip down to the border in 2019 was equal parts, I want to do something, and equal parts absolute anger. You just felt like you needed, if there was something you could do, you just wanted to do it just to show a brighter face of what the United States of America was all about. So in October, after listening to a presentation by Linda, I decided that I needed to go down there. And so through Linda, I contacted the Refugee Health Alliance and made an arrangement to go down and spend the better part of 8 or 9 days actually in Tijuana. And so off I went. I had ideally wanted to go down with either David or Linda or all three of us, but timing just didn't work out that way. So my role down there was hooking up with this organization, and basically on each Saturday, there's about 30 plus or minus healthcare providers that would cross the border and go into these camps that Linda showed you. I'm not sophisticated enough with my Zoom to show you my slides. So you're just going to have to roll with it here a little bit. That said, I went into one of those camps. They divided us up in teams of about 5 or 6, and we would do a camp in the morning and a camp in the afternoon. And whatever we saw, if we could deal with it there, we had supplies. But if we couldn't deal with it, they were then, arrangements were made with folks to be transferred or Ubered from the Tijuana side of the border, or from these camps that were on the outside in the hills, to in the center of Tijuana, there was a free clinic. And so the free clinic was for everybody in Tijuana, in addition to the refugees that were sent there by these medical clinics. And so on the Saturday, I was there. Sunday was kind of a down day, but then I became the major staffer into the Tijuana Free Clinic, at least from a surgery and a wound perspective. It was also staffed by a Mexican physician who was absolutely wonderful. So I did that from Monday through Friday, and then the following Saturday was back off to the camps, and then I came home the following Sunday. I had quite an experience, as Linda would say. For whatever reason, lives' paths crossed, and I crossed the path of an 8-year-old boy at the time who was from Haiti, and he and his family went from Haiti to ultimately Venezuela, then Chile, and then came up through Central America, and we're now on the border in Tijuana, in one of the camps, with a very high number, meaning they weren't going to be crossing the border anytime soon. They had been there for at least 2 months, and they didn't see themselves even presenting for asylum for at least another 6 months or so. And so in the camp, the very first one that I was at, this child was brought to me, and they were kind of excited to have somebody with a surgical background. And this child shows up, and he had been thrown downstairs in Chile. And migrants aren't treated as well. They have the same troubles in Chile that they have south of the border. And this child was either pushed or thrown down a flight of stairs, and he suffered a severe fracture of his right femur. And in Chile, he was taken care of appropriately. His femur was straightened, and what was put on was called an external fixator. And what that is pins are put in and then a bar on the outside of the leg to keep it straight. And that was all totally appropriate. And what's supposed to happen is 6 to 8 weeks later, these pins are supposed to come out, and then the wound is allowed to heal. Well, that was in April, and this was October. And they brought the child to me, and he still obviously had his external fixator on. And you knew that something was wrong because he had this incredible fetid odor as he approached. And looking at this thing, this was, as I would call it in the medical profession, very sophisticated trouble with a capital T. I did not take his dressing down because I knew I didn't have the dressings in this camp to fix it up again. So I had him come and see me in this clinic the following Monday. El Otro Lado and the Refugee Health Alliance paid for his Uber, and he arrived. And basically, out of these pin tracks that were coming out through his skin, he had maggots coming out, and he had inability to fully extend his right knee, so it was flexed permanently. And the child, he did not appear to be ill, but obviously this was not something that was going to be tolerated for too much longer, especially with the amount of infection that he had in his leg. After a couple of days, it was amazing. It took 2 days to just get plain, simple x-rays through this free clinic. we were able to get x-rays, and basically he had bone infection in all of his pin tracks. I sent the films to here in Rockford, and Dr. Scott Ferry, who's a pediatric orthopedist, who I had known when I was still practicing. He was very gracious about reviewing the films and basically wrote a summary basically saying that if these pins don't come out and the appropriate care being given, the child would potentially lose his leg and may never walk again because of the contracture of his right knee. So this became my project over the next 3 or 4 days. I learned through El Otro Lado, the legal folks, how to write a medical affidavit, and also through Linda and her connections here in Rockford with the political world, I was put in contact with the office of Dr. Sherry, or the office of Sherry Bustos, who is our representative for the 17th district. Her office truly stepped up. I sent them a summary of his medical problems, sent them the x-rays and pictures and Dr. Ferry's summary along with mine. And they really got going as far as the political part of this was concerned, started writing letters and whatnot. So at the end of the day, we put together a medical affidavit, a political endorsement, a legal summary of this child, and went through the process of applying for what Linda has already described and David mentioned as parole asylum. In other words, get this child across the border for medical care. And if possible, let's see if it can happen. There is a long story that goes along with this, and I'm not going to go through the details, but let's just say we were successful in getting this child across the border for parole asylum, with parole asylum. And he was ultimately admitted to the San Diego Children's Hospital, where pediatric orthopedic surgery took out his pins, started him on antibiotics. And as luck would, or unluck would have it, within the former Trump administration, the child was then taken into custody by the Department of Homeland Security, and we never heard from him again. Neither El Otro Lado or the Refugee Health Alliance or Representative Bustos' office could break the seal on the Department of Homeland Security and find out what happened to this child. The best that we heard was that his family was sent to Florida, where there was a sponsor family waiting for him. And that's the last I heard. And after multiple inquiries, we don't know ultimately what happened, other than the fact that this child had his pins taken out. He still needed physical therapy, and according to Dr. Ferry, probably needed more sophisticated orthopedic surgery to lengthen the tendons in his leg so that he could someday walk. But we were hopeful that the infection was going to be stabilized and his leg would heal as hopefully it would in an 8-year-old. That was my experience that Linda alluded to, and there's a lot more details that go with it. But suffice it to say, I saw a lot of other things. And in summary of the medical situation there, the Mexican government had absolutely no desire to take care or spend any money on any of the immigrants if they needed care. I saw a young man in his 30s who had been on the list to come to the United States for 9 months. And about a week before they were actually crossing over for their asylum hearing, he developed appendicitis. And I saw him as one of the last people that I saw before I left. He had all the symptoms of appendicitis. He was sent via with an attendant to the hospital in Tijuana because everybody knew that he'd be turned away. And he was turned away with the diagnosis of constipation. And all we could do would be to give him high doses of oral antibiotics to hopefully cover the infection that was going to happen when this thing became a bigger problem. And then he disappeared. I saw just incredible things. There was somebody who had fallen and they had their elbow sticking through the skin of their elbow. The bone was sticking through the skin, and they would not fix his elbow in the hospital in Tijuana unless he paid for the hardware that was going to cost. And that was the summary of about 6,000 pesos, which was about $500 or $600. Money was orchestrated through Linda and some other folks. Ultimately, his elbow was fixed. So the medical situation there when I was there was terrible. I had planned on going back this past April, and then I was planning on arranging something through the medical school here in Rockford. There was a number of students that were very enthusiastic about going down. We were trying to do something, and then COVID happened. So that said, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm on the part of the medical community to help. I'm hopeful, and based on what Linda presented, I think that the Biden administration has taken some early steps. And my hope is that with renewed interest, vaccines, that we can organize better medical care on both sides of the border. I stayed in Tijuana. I stayed in a hotel called Hotel Caesar, which was supposed to be the origin of the Caesar salad. I must say that on only one occasion that I feel like I was in an unsafe environment. And I was welcomed in this clinic. He's the only American who was in there who was working at the time. When I return, and I do hope to return, I wonder what it's going to be like to have a more hopeful environment compared to how dismal it was when I was there. It was so sad to be in an environment where you felt like, I don't think I can do anything. I could help people if I had it in my bag, if I was able, based on my own experience and knowledge, I could hopefully do something. But at the end of the day, on the big picture, except for one at a time, there wasn't any hope. So my hope going forward is that I can go down again, that we can work on both sides of the border, and we can avoid some of the secrecy that is involved with the border environment. It was kind of like, oh, you can't go there because nobody can go there. Could I go to a detention center? Oh, no, nobody's allowed in there. And you know that there are people who have medical problems in there. People want to go and help, but they weren't allowed there. My hope is that those environments will be available to the Red Cross. They'll be available to these teams of medical people that were coming down to see these people, and that would change the environment significantly. At the end of the day, I have one thing that I would like to propose to anybody who's connected politically, and that is I would love to see some mechanism whereby this parole asylum for people who have significant problems can be expedited into the United States for medical care. And you say, oh, well, the right would say, well, we don't want to pay for those people. But you know what? There's doctors here that really want to take care of sick people. That's what you're supposed to do. That's why you sign up to be a doctor. You want to take care of sick people. There was, and I'm getting near the end, there was a child who had a retinoblastoma. And a retinoblastoma is a tumor of the retina. And this child was sent to the border. This happened 3 or 4 months before I got there, but all the papers were filled out because he was losing or had nearly lost the vision in one eye. He was denied parole asylum at the border, sent back to the camp. He returned to see a pediatrician who was down there with me at the time. He saw him and he was losing his vision in the other eye. So now you've got a child who's about 6, who's about to be potentially blind for the rest of their life. And this pediatrician, he did everything he possibly could, and they did get parole asylum for the child to go to Boston Children's Hospital. He was a pediatrician from Massachusetts. And they got the kid to get to the Boston Children's Hospital. I don't know what happened to him after that. But that said, there's gotta be a way that children with severe heart defects, retinoblastomas, kidney tumors of childhood, and the kind of thing that I saw, which was trauma related, can't we take care of these folks? And if they then fail their asylum request, that's okay. From my point of view, if they don't fit the criteria for asylum, I don't have any problem with them being returned to wherever they came from. But we can't let people who have treatable conditions stay south of the border and just wallow in this insane inhumanity that is down there. So that said, that's the end of my soapbox. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I appreciate it.
Okay. Next, we will have Fred Tsao, who is at one time was a Rockfordian, and he had deserted us for Chicago. He was a legal aid attorney here, and he's now with the Immigrants' Right group after a stint with the ACLU. And Fred, hopefully, is going to tell us what we can do to fix all this.
Okay, thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone, and it's particularly good to see some familiar faces from my time in Rockford, lo these many years ago. So I know we've already had a pretty full program, so I'll try to be brief and concise in what I'm going to say. So what I was tasked with is describing or discussing what's changed since the new administration took office 34 days ago. And keep in mind that this is barely 1 month into the new administration. That said, this administration has, pretty much hit the ground running so far as trying to undo much of the damage and hurtful policies that was inflicted by their predecessors. And so I'll touch on a few of these, because, Paul and David and Linda were talking about the situation on the border. I'll start there. And Linda's already touched on a few of these items, but I'll go over them again and maybe do a bit of backfill. The Biden administration undertook several initiatives on day one, right after they were sworn into office, and in at least one case before they even took office. One of the day one initiatives was to stop enrolling people into the migration protection protocols, or the Remain in Mexico program. So no more people were being added onto this program. No more people were being subjected to, being returned to Mexico. Now, I should note here that there have been roughly 70,000 individuals who were enrolled into MPP, into Remain in Mexico. Many of those individuals, unfortunately, have given up their cases, and in many cases have just returned to their country of origin or otherwise abandoned their cases. That leaves about 25,000 individuals who still have pending cases and who are still waiting patiently to be admitted to the United States, to process their asylum claims. The good news, as Linda mentioned, is that starting this past weekend, the United States has started allowing individuals who are enrolled in MPP to enter the United States, begin the process of seeking asylum here in the United States, and in most cases, being able to stay with their families who may be scattered throughout the country. So that is a start. I think Linda mentioned that there were 25 people who were admitted to the United States, led into the United States on the very first day. For better or worse, that pace is probably going to be the pace at which people are going to be allowed in. So 25 a day, 25,000 pending cases. It's going to take a while to work through this. I should also note here that David had mentioned some agreements that the United States had entered into with several countries in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, that essentially designated those countries as "quote unquote" safe third countries, such that people passing through those countries on their way to the United States would be disqualified if they have not applied for asylum in those countries. The Biden administration has rescinded those agreements. So it will no longer be the case that people who pass through those countries would be subject to disqualification. More broadly, the Biden White House also announced a couple of executive orders or proclamations on February 2nd. Linda mentioned one of them, which is the creation of a family reunification task force that will follow through on trying to reunite children who were separated at the border from their parents. There are unfortunately several hundred children who remain separated from their parents. These many months and years after they were separated. Another executive order launches a process to review in a more global fashion migration policies and procedures, within the Western Hemisphere and from Central America specifically. One of the initiatives is to revive what's called the Central American Minor Program, which was undertaken by the Obama administration in 2014, that was designed to allow for safe processing of unaccompanied minors from those three countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and enable these minors to come to the United States safely without having to resort to the caravans or smuggling operations or asylum claims at the border. So that program is being revived. Excuse me. The administration is also reviewing many of the regulations that were put in place by the previous administration, and this includes a grand set of regulations that many advocates refer to as the death to asylum regulations. This was a sweeping set of regulations that were put in place by the previous administration, proposed last summer with a short comment period, and then finalized in the closing months of the administration, right when they were on their way out the door. Fortunately, those regulations have been enjoined by a federal court. It's unlikely that the Biden administration will try to defend that lawsuit any further, but it will finally take a fairly lengthy regulatory process to clear away those regulations and other regulations that were put in place by the last administration. I should note here as well that one of the really insidious things that the last administration did is create multiple layers of different regulations that covered much of the same territory, but did so in a way that's kind of enmeshed or layered, such that, if you undo one set of regulations, there'd still be a bunch of other regulations in place that would have the same effect. Asylum is one of these areas. So it's going to take a while to undo everything that the last administration did in the area of asylum. I should note here as, excuse me. I should note here as well that there are still proclamations and orders having to do with the COVID pandemic that are in place that the Biden administration has not lifted, and that in itself is limiting the the numbers and the numbers of individuals who are being admitted into the United States at this time. So even if all of the asylum regulations were to be lifted, the pandemic related proclamations, which may themselves be lifted but have not been lifted yet, could still curb the number of people who are being allowed in, including allowed into process for asylum. Now, I've mainly been touching on asylum processing and the situation at the border, but I think it bears mentioning that there were a bunch of other things that the last administration did that the current administration is trying to undo, and I'll try to touch on a few of these really quickly. First off, one of the first things that was put in place 4 years ago was a travel ban that barred individuals from certain designated countries from seeking visas or being admitted into the United States. This is more commonly known as the Muslim ban, because most of the countries that were included in the first ban were predominantly Muslim. This went through several iterations. It was ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court, and then the administration piled on with a couple of additional country-specific bans, including most recently, about a year ago, a ban that covered many African countries, including Nigeria. So one of the first things that the Biden administration did, again on day one, was to rescind all of those bans. So the travel bans, the country-specific travel bans, are no longer in effect. However, the COVID-related bans are still in effect, and a more general ban on or freeze on visa processing is also still in place as well. So even with the rescission of the travel bans, the visa freeze is still in effect. And so this is another example of the type of layering that I've mentioned previously. Second, refugee processing. Back in 2017, the federal government was admitting 110,000 refugees per year. The then incoming administration then sliced that number dramatically to the point where the refugee resettlement number was set last September at 15,000, a very, very dramatic cut. So a few weeks ago, President Biden announced that it was his intention to not just go back to Obama era levels, but to increase even further such that for this current fiscal year, which ends in September, we would admit 62,500 refugees, and then in the following year, 125,000 refugees. Again, a 180-degree turn from the previous administration. I should also mention some other policies that seek to exclude individuals from coming into the country, and specifically one called public charge. This is essentially a wealth test on many immigrants who are seeking to come to the United States or who are here in the United States and seeking legal status. Now, much of the effect of public charge, public charge is probably best known for trying to restrict the kinds of public benefit programs that immigrants can qualify for, such that if they do receive these benefits, they could be denied an immigrant visa or a green card based on the usage of those benefits. But there are other aspects of public charge that facilitate the consideration of things like age, financial status, medical status, education, English literacy and fluency that would have the effect of keeping out of the country many individuals who have not had economic opportunities in their home countries, have not had educational opportunities in their home countries. And this includes, of course, many older immigrants, as well as as well as many immigrants who may be trying to reunite with their families, but again, may not have had the same opportunities as people from wealthier countries. This rule was put in place by the previous administration and took effect throughout the country about a year ago. And in fact, it took effect nationwide exactly a year ago tomorrow. So the Biden administration has announced its intentions to review this policy and potentially undo it. Some of you may have heard that the Supreme Court has agreed to take up the previous administration's appeal of an adverse decision that arose out of New York that would have struck down this public charge regulation. But even if the Supreme Court upholds the regulation, the Biden administration can undo it. I'll mention a few other things really quickly. Another thing that the last administration did is turn immigration enforcement up to 11. It basically gave Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, free reign to basically arrest anybody who they suspect of being out of status and subjecting them to deportation, which again was a 180-degree turn from what the Obama administration had been doing in the last years of that administration. Another day one action on the part of the Biden administration was to try to recalibrate and prioritize who gets targeted by ICE enforcement. So instead of just trying to arrest everybody, regardless of how long they've been in the country or what their family history is here or their ties to the community, instead ICE will be looking at more recent arrivals, people who don't have as much stake in the country, as well as looking at potential threats to national security or public safety. These terms are still pretty squishy, and they're still so relatively vague that a lot of advocates, including myself, are still fairly uncomfortable with the way these terms are described. But at very least, this is a step in the right direction from what the last administration was doing. Another day one action has to do with DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which the last administration tried its best to undo, and which those attempts were essentially scuttled by the Supreme Court, and ultimately DACA was fully restored by the previous administration under court order. So the Biden administration, again in another day one action, said that they would do their best to restore and fortify DACA. So it's now the policy of the Biden administration to uphold and preserve the program, to fight off court challenges, and potentially to expand the program as it may be. The last initiative I'll mention is, to give you an idea of how insidious the last administration was, they even tried to prevent people from becoming citizens. And one of the things that they did was, very sneakily unveiled and put into effect a new citizenship test that would have been much, much harder for many people to pass. It doubled the number of questions people were asked. It changed many of the questions. It even created some political slants to some of these questions. Probably no surprise there. Most dramatically, one question which previously asked, who do United States senators represent? The previous answer was the people of the state. The updated answer under this new test was citizens of that state, which is wrong. It's just plain wrong. So I'm happy to report that just this past Monday, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services announced that it is not going to implement this new test. It's going to revert back to the test that was in place prior to this administration. I'll note really quickly as well that this administration and many members of Congress are also undertaking legislative initiatives. Even before he took office, President Biden announced that he would be introducing the U.S. Citizenship Act, which Linda already referenced, that would create a sweeping legalization program for most, if not all, of the undocumented people in the United States. To go back to the original topic or the previous presentations, it also has an entire title that has to do with regional migration, and and among other things would again, put the Central American Minor Program into law, provide investment for Central American nations, and look at the root causes why people are fleeing those countries or feel that they need to flee those countries. There would be other provisions that would speed through the very long visa backlogs, which now take as long as 22 years in some categories, and fix many of the backlogs within the immigration court system as well. There are other pieces of legislation that are in the mix as well. Senator Durbin, our own senator, has reintroduced a version of the DREAM Act that would enable many of the people with DACA or who may otherwise qualify for DACA yet to finally apply for green cards. And there's also going to be a legislation to allow essential workers to gain lawful status as well. Essential workers being many of the people who are keeping us safe and sane and fed and the lights on in the midst of this pandemic and this winter. So there are going to be many opportunities to plug into this, and I would definitely urge you all to speak about this legislation with Representative Bustos and Representative Kinzinger. Some people think that Representative Kinzinger might be gettable on immigration matters. Some people think that Representative Bustos may even be gettable, but I think that they're both going to need to be pushed. So let me close with that hopeful note that both of those members of the Illinois congressional delegation will see the light. Thanks, everyone.
Well, last but not least is Jenny from JFON. Jenny is not a stranger to some of us because she used to come to Rockford for a clinic at Court Street United Methodist Church. And we hope to see her again once the pandemic is done. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, it's definitely good to see some of you. Those of you who I know, I used to come out to Rockford at least once a month. So it's been a while since I've been out there. But as David said, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Jenny Grabelski. I'm currently a supervisory attorney at Northern Illinois Justice for Our Neighbors. That's what JFON stands for. And I've been here for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years this October. And I've been working in immigration in various other capacities for about over 16 years now. So I've been around a little bit. I've seen many changes. And here we are experiencing another huge change right now. So I've been asked to highlight our work a little bit, and then I'll also get into some of the stuff that Fred got into and just sort of like what we see in terms of the direct work that we've been doing, and some hopes and other things like that. So some highlights for our work. When I started, I was the only staff member. We're now a staff of 7, which includes 4 of us on the legal team and 3 on like a programmatic team. Though we all do a lot of work together. We hired 2 of these team members last year in 2020. Also last year, we worked on 817 total legal cases from all over Northern Illinois, including a good chunk from the Rockford area. Those cases include citizenship cases, family-based cases, removal defense cases, asylum cases, which you heard a lot of. And back in October 2019, actually the entire JFON staff took a trip also to work with Al Otro Lado in Tijuana, and that was also very interesting. And I've been to the border a couple times myself, to other parts of the border, so I've seen a lot of what's been going on, and it is horrifying. We also do U visa cases, which are visas for victims of certain crimes, and VAWA cases, which are for victims of domestic violence, among many others. And in fact, the last normal day before pandemic times, which happened to be Friday the 13th, the entire legal team got to go to accompany a longtime client of ours from Ghana, who we first met in November 2012, get her citizenship ceremony. We got to go to her citizenship oath ceremony, which was kind of, I guess, a good way to get this all started. But the reason she had sort of been tied up in the system for so long is because she was subjected to a lot of anti-Black racism specifically, and fraud, assumptions of fraud. She did not commit fraud, assumptions of fraud, probably because of where she was from and because she's Black. Just another quick client story, and I'll post the link in the chat. We have a client from Senegal who was recently featured in a national JFON newsletter and other national UMC publications about an asylum seeker from Senegal. So again, you know, sort of on the subject of asylum, we do that kind of work here too, though it looks a little different than the work that's being done at the border. In addition to legal work, we also offered trainings to over 2,000 members of immigrant communities on subjects such as public charge, DACA, the census, emergency funding, and other COVID-19 resources and workers' rights during COVID-19. Advocacy has always been an important part of our mission. Not too long ago, our very committed and dedicated Rockford Clinic volunteers played a crucial role in making sure that there wasn't an immigration detention center in Winnebago County. I know many of you probably on the Zoom call were involved with that, so thank you very much for doing that. It's very much appreciated. But in terms of other issue advocacy we've done this past year, we've advocated for and supported the fair tax, which unfortunately didn't pass, a Get Out the Vote campaign, welcoming and sanctuary city ordinances, making sure immigrants are counted in the census regardless of their immigration status, and supporting resources for immigrant communities in Illinois. Also, in association with ICER, the organization that Fred's at, we have been able to distribute almost $200,000 in direct grants to individuals who didn't qualify for stimulus payments from the federal government because they were undocumented, which has also been amazing. And then we've been doing prep work for individuals who are going to be taking the citizenship exams, which thankfully are going to be changed back to normal, through a partnership with the New Americans Initiative, which is a state of Illinois funded program. And since the pandemic started, we've pivoted to doing those classes remotely. We provide all these services in 24 different communities throughout Northern Illinois, including Rockford and Belvedere, as well as kind of all over the state. So this new year is bringing about a lot of changes as we transition to a new political administration and see what happens with the COVID-19 pandemic. For now, what we're doing, the legal team is focusing on our current clients and helping them through cases and situations that have gotten more complex because of some of the stuff that Fred brought up, because of what the former president was doing. It also takes a lot of work to keep up with all the changes and things, and everything is just taking a lot longer, both due to Trump and the pandemic. So clients are understandably concerned, and we have to try to work with them and try to calm their fears as much as we can realistically. We're not sure when we'll be able to provide legal services to new clients just yet. It might not be this year, but as soon as we can, Rockford is definitely going to be one of the first places we get started up again, because we understand that there's a serious lack of legal resources, immigration legal resources out there. But depending on, how COVID plays out and stuff like that, the model might not be exactly like it had been in the past, but hopefully, we understand that the work out there is important. And we are still working with plenty of Rockfordians and, folks from surrounding areas. So don't worry about that. We still do a lot of work for the community there, just kind of more remotely and virtually now. But that said, our executive director, Claudia Marchan, is working with some of our regular volunteers to get involved in other ways by providing things like Know Your Rights presentations, teaching English and civics to folks seeking US citizenship, and working on advocacy projects too. So if you want to get involved, you can reach out and then we can put you in touch with someone who could probably help you get involved. And so here at NIJ Fund, we're cautiously optimistic about Biden changes. We do have some idea of what to expect since he was obviously Obama's vice president. But Obama's legacy on immigration is at best mixed, but on a lot of times pretty disappointing, which is sort of what I think will ultimately happen with the Biden administration. But I'm just putting that out there because I hope he'll prove me wrong. Some good things that have happened so far, like Fred mentioned in more detail, is the U.S. Citizenship Act, would give a lot of folks opportunities that are long overdue. DACA is here to stay. They're going to reinstate something called prosecutorial discretion. Detainees are getting COVID vaccines. The safe third country resettlement agreements are being ended, which is those countries are not safe, so it's ridiculous. Reverting to the old naturalization exam, like Fred mentioned, getting rid of the MPP program, which is going to take time. And then, he tried to do a moratorium on deportations, but there was litigation to block the deportation on moratoriums. And so the constant changes that we had seen in the last 4 years under Trump seem to be a continuing phenomenon in immigration practice. And I feel like because of what's going on and all this stuff that Biden has to do to undo Trump's policies, it's gonna likely be our reality for a while now. Deportations have not actually stopped or seemingly reduced much. A lot of Black immigrants in particular are continuing to be deported to places such as Haiti. There seem to be very regular flights back to Haiti, Cameroon, Congo, Angola, and other Caribbean and African countries. That this is happening at all during the time of a worldwide pandemic is sort of horrifying. But so far, I think the numbers are 26,000 people have been deported in the month that Biden has been in office. So we definitely need to be holding our electeds accountable because, Biden isn't just like the solution to our problems. And, we need to keep pushing. Let's see. So there's already also some talk that the bill that Biden introduced is going to be challenged, given sort of like some of the challenges that he's already facing with some of his nominations and stuff like that. So definitely push your elected officials if they're sort of on the fence or they might be pushable. There's also rumors about the law that are already going around in immigrant communities. It was just introduced last week, but we already have a lot of folks calling and asking if they qualify under it, asking this question. So there's likely some misinformation going around, and we need to be mindful of messaging when we're talking to immigrant communities. And there are, of course, always going to be people who prey on vulnerable communities, such as the undocumented community. I know that notario fraud is a big issue all over the state, but in Rockford, there's some really sort of problematic notario programs. So those are folks who are not allowed to practice law, but still try to represent people in immigration proceedings or file papers for them, and usually do it not in a great way, charging lots of money. So we don't want that. So some of the interim policies Biden is proposing also have some concerns that have been raised by advocates. Like, for example, the divestment from private prisons that some of you may have heard about doesn't include immigration detention centers, unfortunately. A detention center for children that was used for 1 month under Trump's administration was reopened, I think, yesterday because of COVID concerns and the place. The space, they need more space and keeping children in detention. So children are still being kept in cages, for those of you who are wondering. There was an ICE priorities memo that was recently published, which gives ICE officers to make good judgment calls about very complicated, or good faith judgment calls about very complicated matters that, like, sometimes I need to research for a couple days and talk to a bunch of people about. The gang category in that ICE priorities memo is also kind of squishy and will come down to potential reliance on gang databases, which are usually racist, unreliable, and secretive. So things are certainly going to be better than they were under Trump, but we need to understand and remember that better does not necessarily always mean good. Like I mentioned before, our problems haven't been solved because Trump is now out of office. We need to keep pushing the Biden administration, which at least seems willing to listen and willing to be pushed a little bit to get the change that we need and want for a just, humane, and inclusive immigration system. And I also want to be clear, like I think Fred mentioned too, that the reason we're here is because of the work of like on the ground activists, folks like, ourselves, everyone on this call who have been doing this work for a very long time. We need to continue to defer to the folks, particularly like organizations that are run by undocumented folks and folks who bear the brunt of the problematic immigration policies, like Black immigrants, to be thoughtful about the changes that we're asking to put into place. Yeah, so that's it. I know we wanted to end at 8:30, but I think we're probably going to allow some time for questions now. Thank you again for letting me be here and sharing the work that we do.
Yeah, given the fairly large number of people who are still on the call, if you would put your questions in chat and maybe direct them to who you would like to answer them, that would be very helpful. So far, we don't have one, but we'll give you a few more minutes. You want to just want to ask it rather than not be in chat? Go ahead.
I just have a comment to make. I was on a webinar last night from the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, and they had some people talking, and one woman had made a documentary. I sent it to Linda. It's called Guardians of Our Memories, and it talks about some people that had been in a town in Mexico, Guadalupe. And Guadalupe was a town about in 2009, had 25,000 inhabitants. They now have 1,500 inhabitants. These people were killed by cartel and gangs and all, and many of them have been able to leave. But the stories these people told were horrible, just absolutely horrible. So what goes on, if people don't believe that's what goes on, they need to see this movie. It's called Guardians of Our Memories. I sent a link to Linda, so maybe she can send it out.
Okay. Thank you. And we do have a question in chat, which I'm not sure who can answer. It's what's the status of the detainees who are closest to us, the ones in McHenry County Jail? There is a specific program run by nuns that serve that program, but they're not with us tonight. Does anybody have any information on McHenry County?
Well, I can say a few words. Jenny, you should chime in as well if there's anything additional. Yeah, the McHenry County Jail has had a contract with ICE for almost 20 years now, whereby ICE operates one of the floors in the jail. And actually, this floor was constructed specifically to house ICE detainees or to detain individuals for ICE purposes. The capacity at all ICE detention centers has decreased significantly because of COVID. Fewer people are being arrested. People continue to be deported, unfortunately. Social distancing as to the best that the jail administrators are able to perform, that's kind of put in place. The program that David just referred to, the visitation program or pastoral care program, is run by the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants. I'm a founding board member of ICDI, and I've just newly returned to the board after a hiatus. The visitation program, unfortunately, is also on hiatus due to the pandemic. But I think once it's safe to return, that program will resume. There is movement afoot to try to end that contract. I'm aware of several organizations in and around the McHenry County area that are trying to organize on the ground to try to, persuade the county board members to undo the contract. Given the declining detention numbers, the jail contract is becoming a white elephant. It's not profiting the county in the way that it had been previously when the jail was able to fill up its unfortunately fill up its capacity to hold individuals for ICE. So that's basically the state of play as I understand it.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that other than people are still being detained there. I'm still seeing requests for like bond representation for folks who are there. As far as I know, the like COVID outbreaks and stuff there haven't been as bad as some of the other detention facilities that are run by private corporations like in the South. Those aren't allowed in Illinois, thanks to like good advocacy work and legislative work from groups like ICER. Yeah, thank you, Fred, for that. And so, yeah, they're still there. People are still being detained. Hopefully they'll start to get people out of detention, offer better bonds under Trump and stuff like that. But yeah, it's fine. It's still, people are still there, unfortunately.
Well, I don't see any more questions. I would like to thank everybody, and I would ask that the pastor would close us out with a prayer.
Of course. And thank you everyone for coming today. And it's been such a blessing to be together and listen to all the stories and experiences that we have shared. So let us go to God in prayer as we conclude our time together. Holy God, we come to you again on this evening that you have given us. God, thank you because we have listened and learned and been pushed to many things today. And God, we know that you are working in the midst of us and you've been with us as we have gathered this evening. God, we ask that you go with us as we go to different places, as we go to a time of rest, as we go to our other duties for today, and as we finish the day. God, thank you, and we ask of you blessing as you continue to be with us now and always, and as you continue to help us to be means of grace in the world today as we bring justice and we bring of your love and your good news to immigrants and refugees and those who need us the most today. God, thank you again for everybody that is here. And we go with your blessing. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
God bless everyone. Take care. Thank you.